The New Orleans Saints stick and pick at pick 29 and get their guy in Bryan Bresee. How does he fit? How will he contribute? And why was he the guy? We'll get to all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day or after midnight every day, of course. Appreciate you as always for being here with us. Don't forget you can subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network, Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation site covering the New Orleans Saints. You'd also find me Tuesdays on Locked On NFL and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And we are live here on YouTube post the first round of the NFL draft. Appreciate everybody for being here. We already got a big crowd, so appreciate everybody for showing up. I'm coming to you live from the New Orleans Saints team facility, so that's why my camera looks a little different, why the background looks a little bit different, but couldn't wait to just get home and talk to you. Wanted to talk to you right away because I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm a big fan of this selection for the New Orleans Saints. So Bryan Bresee is the pick, the defensive tackle out of Clemson, 29th overall. We'll go over how he can contribute immediately. We'll also take a look at his fit because we got a pretty good idea of that. First of all, just simply by the position that he plays, what we already know what the Saints need, but also his own sort of words as well as Dennis Allen's own words that gave us a little bit of insight into all of that. But let's go first into why Bryan Bresee was the pick. The day before the NFL draft, we spoke with Mickey Loomis right here at the Saints team facility. And one of the things that I asked about was, what is one of the, or maybe some of the cornerstone criterion when it comes to evaluating draft prospects that don't involve the stat sheet, collegiate production, academic testing, things like that. And the thing that Mickey Loomis really kind of zeroed in on was makeup. And when he talked about makeup, he means the character, what that player is off the field, how they, their awareness of the things that they need to get better at, their strengths, their weaknesses, their maturity. Are they leaders in the locker room, their teammates, all of these other things. And so he ended up sort of speaking pretty highly of character. And if you remember, I did a show weeks ago in one of our Thursday draft prospect breakdowns about Bryan Bresee. And one of the first things that we discussed about him was character. This is a guy that if you look at the box score, you might feel a little bit underwhelmed. You might feel a little bit disappointed. This was a guy that was the #1 high school recruit across the nation, right one spot up ahead, Bryce Young, who went 1-1 this evening to the Carolina Panthers. And don't worry, I'll discuss a little bit about how Bryan Bresee immediately impacts that player in that selection. But one of the other things that you look at when it comes to Bryan Bresee is not only sort of that makeup, that character, which are all there. He handled adversity. He's a grown player. I mean, when we spoke to him in Zoom, wildly, mature, very aware, very understanding of who he is as a player, as a human, as a man, as somebody, the situation that he's a part of, all of that. And all those things are genuinely positive notions. But the other piece of it, too, is that, he's a great fit for New Orleans on the field. And this was a need for them, defensive tackle. It's probably the position that we've hounded the most here on the Locked On Saints podcast, where we've discussed what is it that the New Orleans Saints need to address. Where should they go? Once they answered the question at quarterback and they got Michael Thomas back on contract for 2023, it felt like defensive tackle was probably the spot that they were going to go all along. And I had championed guys like Mazi Smith and Bryan Bresee, the potential for a guy like Lucas Finesse to potentially fall, which we saw him go off the board top 20 in this draft. And it was a weird draft. We saw guys like Emmanuel Forbes and other outliers go mad early in this year's draft. And so when we look at where Bryan Bresee is as a player, where he has left to develop, and what it is that he has to contribute to the New Orleans Saints, the answer to all those questions gives you a pretty good idea of why he was the pick. High character guy. He's somebody that the Saints looked at and understood that he knew enough about himself to be able to come in, know where to improve, where he wanted to improve, where he wants to get better, and work with them in being able to make sure that they achieve that alongside him. Then you look at exactly where it is that he contributes for you. He is a pass rushing, penetrating, interior defensive lineman, 3-tech all the way, although he has the ability to move from nose tackle all the way out to 5-tech, which is a little bit more, think like Cam Jordan, his rookie season, right? Lining up on the inside of the tackle, on the outside, a little bit more of a run stopper position. So I see it every day up in here. Thank you, Kenneth. Appreciate that shout out. And then you look at him being, 6'6", and then he's in the 270, 280 range. I mean, he's somebody, or 6'5". He's somebody that fits all of the prototypes and that has the ability to help the Saints improve where they need to improve, which is being an interior pass rushing team. This is a big thing that hounded the Saints offense for a long time, was giving up pressures up the middle. Now they're becoming a team when you bring in Nathan Shepherd from the New York Jets, who was top 10 in 2023 when it came to pass rush win rate, and you add a guy like Bryan Bresee to that mix, a guy like Malcolm Roach, who's flashed a ton since he's been here in New Orleans, who comes back on a second contract. Then you're adding together and you're putting together an attacking interior defensive line, which is a big thing that the New Orleans Saints really needed to address, a spot where they wanted to get better, and a spot where I think they've gotten better now as they roll through. Still work to be done there. There's also guys like, of course, Khalen Saunders, who maybe carries the reputation of a bit more of a run stopper, but has the ability to impact the game when it comes to pass rush as well. And then you add in, Prince Emeli, who comes in he was on the practice squad last year. The Saints now have 5 defensive tackles that they can go into camp with, maybe add a couple more, or maybe add another name if they want to, whether it's in the draft or undrafted free agency. It's a position they've been really successful with when it comes to undrafted free agency. So to be able to come in and now have a group that you can pick the best 3 out of and rotate them a bunch, I think Bryan Bresee shows up in New Orleans and plays a ton of snaps his rookie season nearly right away. So I think that that's probably the place where you can look at him and you can say, okay, here's why the Saints liked him. Character, makeup, all the things that they know that they really like in terms of the intangibles of a player, his ability to be able to impact them in a place where they need the improvement over on the defensive side, and his scheme fit, his prototypical fit, right? He's got the body size, he plays the role, he plays the position. So you think about where it is that he lines up. I think that he becomes that 3-tech for you, lining up in between the guard and the tackle, and then his focus early on in his career is pin your ears back and get after that quarterback. So we'll discuss that a little bit more when we go into how he contributes immediately. But I think all of those kind of summarize the reasons why the Saints really liked him. And I know a lot of folks have a lot of questions about Bryan Bresee in terms of his health. ACL tear back a few years ago. He had a shoulder surgery in 2022. This kidney infection that was just kind of this fluky situation that he dealt with. And then, of course, don't forget that he also managed the adversity of his little sister at 15 years old passing away, Ella, right before the 2022 season. Before that was an 18-month battle, and since then has been a prolonged battle, I'm sure, for him and his family. So him navigating all of that adversity and coming out on the side, just this really, really good dude, is great. And that's what the New Orleans Saints love, and that's one of the things that he ends up bringing to you. So I think when you look at why, and you ask the question, why was Bryan Bresee the pick? It's because he checks all of the boxes. Oh, and by the way, if you had those questions about the medicals, Dennis Allen addressed that pretty overtly, pretty clearly, pretty directly in his post-day 1 press conference, where he said they feel very comfortable where his medicals are. So they feel comfortable going into it. There's a role for Bryan Bresee his rookie year, and as long as he continues to check the health box, he should immediately contribute to this team. So where is his fit? Where does he line up, and how does he contribute? How does he benefit the other players around him? Let's get to that next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, our live post-day 1 draft episode here on the show. And today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Ultimate Pro Football GM, who have been so kind actually to sponsor everything that we're doing around the NFL draft. So if you're somebody that believes that you want to be an NFL GM or could be an NFL GM and could manage a football franchise, this mobile app is absolutely for you. You can try it out at ultimate-gm.com or simply search Ultimate Pro Football GM on your app store today. And don't forget to use the promo code Locked On in all caps so you get a 100% free boost to your franchise in the game store. This game lets you manage the salary cap, draft, just like we're here covering here at the Saints facility. You can draft, you can go through free agency, you can hire new coaches, coordinators, upgrade facilities, whole bunch of cool stuff that you can do. And the best part about it is that it's entirely offline, so you can play it anywhere, even like in the air on a plane, which I do all the time. So make sure you check it out, ultimate-gm.com, Ultimate Pro Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, family, continuing on with this live post-draft day one episode of Locked On Saints. Appreciate you as always making us your first listen of the day every day. For all you everydayers out there, we'll be right back at this again tomorrow after the Friday night. After Friday night day is done, if you will, and then we'll go through all the day two selections and everything. So we'll be right back here again late tomorrow night, early Saturday morning. So appreciate you as always for being here. So how does a guy like Bryan Bresee fit in the New Orleans Saints defense? I think the thing that you look at is kind of what I teased a little bit earlier, which is you like him as a 3-tech, a guy that can line up in between the guard and tackle, pin his ears back, penetrate, rush the passer. That's kind of the role where he fits in. But I don't think that that's all that he does. I mean, when you have a guy like Bresee who played nose tackle, that played 2-eye, that played heads up 2, that played 4 interior, that played out to the 5, that did all of these different things, that played all of these different defensive line techniques. And you'll want to tune in Wednesday for our midweek fundamentals as we go through, I'll break down all of those techniques for you as well. But because of the versatility that he has, I think that maximizes the amount of opportunities that he gets to be on the field in 2023. The other thing to keep in mind here is that when we spoke to him on Zoom, actually on that, there's a computer. No, you can't see it. Anyway, there's a computer back there that we were with him on. One of the things that he mentioned was that he didn't just play in a traditional 4-3 front or anything, 4-man front. He played at even fronts, odd fronts, bears, when you kind of think about like an extra, fifth man on the defensive line, all that. So he played all these different types of defenses, and I think that works really well for New Orleans, who also plays a bunch of different types of defenses. They're not a purely this, that, or the other team. They change everything situationally, and that could be down and distance, that could be field position, that could be, a scoring position, like all these other things. And so because they constantly change the way that they deploy their defense, him coming from a defense like Clemson, where they evaluated on a game-by-game basis what their defense was going to look like, what their base was going to look like, all of those other things, you get a lot of versatility from a guy like Bresee because of that, because he has experience playing in a bunch of different things. It's kind of like the same way that we look at corners that play both man and zone coverage, but it's down on the defensive line, very, very close to the quarterback, where you have the ability to make an immediate impact on a play as opposed to waiting for the ball to be thrown. So good morning from Germany. Oh, wow. That's awesome. So I think when you look at where Bryan Bresee fits in, it's really, I think you start with that that 3-tech interior pass rusher, but I don't think he's limited to that either. He's somebody that you're going to be able to move around. And I think that's such a big part of what the New Orleans Saints do on their defense anyway, is the rotation. It is not only the rotation of when he's off the field and someone else is on, and when that person is off the field and when he is on, it's a rotation in terms of how they might move him to 2-eye to have him line up over the inside shoulder of the guard as opposed to on the outside shoulder of the guard, and then bring their, second defensive tackle to the 2-eye on the opposite side. And then all of a sudden there's even spacing, who's going to, you're kind of 2-gapping and all these other things. So I think that there's a lot of different ways that he would be able to contribute from all of those different kind of spots. And so I think when you look at where it is that he fits, the answer is kind of wherever they ask him to go. And obviously that's sort of his philosophy of it too. He's willing to do whatever it takes to help the team win. You know how, that whole question and answer goes. But I think when we spoke with Dennis Allen too, I mean, he observed in his, he said that they went back and watched more tape of him this morning, which gives you an idea of how much they, were pretty like kind of keyed in on this guy. And that in the midst of going back through it, like versatility was a big part of it. But they also like what he can do on the move. They also like what he can do as a, bigger body that has length that can, attack off the defensive line. I think one of the things that you see when you watch him on his tape too is his violent hands and the way that he knocks offensive linemen kind of back, kind of takes them by surprise almost. And his ability to kind of eat up some space in the middle to the point to where when the double team comes, he can handle the double team, all of that. I do think that I love it too, Jerry. I do think that there is something to be said about his continued sort of building of understanding leverage and continued building around how it is that he builds out his counter moves. I think those are kind of the big things that you'd like to see him really continue to build. Or continue to address and improve upon. But I also think like the run game is the next place where you want to see him continue to do that. And so some of that is shedding blocks in that area of the game, all of that. So that all kind of is in the same family, which is a good thing because a lot of it is coachable. And when you think about Todd Grantham, who the Saints brought in as their defensive line coach, he's all about an attacking defensive line. That's what he did. He helped create that at Alabama last year as an analyst. He helped to create that as a defensive coordinator in Florida with the Gators and as a defensive line coach throughout his time. He loves attacking defensive lines, and I think that Bryan Bresee fits that mentality really, really well, and obviously has the skill set to be able to fit on the field in that system and in that scheme really, really well also. So I think it's pretty clear where it is that this guy ends up fitting in. And keep in mind, too, that in October of this year, he'll only be 22 years old. That's it. He's 21 years old right now as he is drafted. So when there's so much conversation happening around, you think about the Hendon Hooker conversation and age and all these other things that have kind of come up around all of that. And then you look at where Bryan Bresee is, he's kind of on the opposite side of that spectrum. So when you think about his ability to develop and where he is and coming from this defense that has produced so many NFL players. There's a pedigree there. There's a championship nature there. There's good schemes there that translate well to the NFL. Plus you think about the losses. So this is Slim South is going the exact same spot that I was. Plus you add in the loss of David Onyemata and Shai Tuttle and Kentavious Street, who have all headed elsewhere. Not only is there room for him to develop, but there's time for him to develop in terms of what his build is. And there's also opportunity for him to be able to develop, not just in the background somewhere else when it comes to, practice and all these other things. He'll be able to develop because of the opportunities that he'll get out on the football field as well. So I think that he'll get all of those things. And look, where do the New Orleans Saints go next? I think they can still continue to address the trenches. I think they could still stand to add an edge rusher. They can go to the trench on the opposite side and, go to the offensive interior. So I think starting off at defensive tackle was a wise move by the New Orleans Saints, especially considering the way that the board fell, which was wildly positive for the New Orleans Saints. It was the way that board fell with having those tight ends still on the board. They were one pick away from Myles Murphy. They were able to land Bryan Bresee. Mozzie Smith went just a few picks ahead of them. Like, you could see the cloud of players still holding strong as they got closer and closer to being on the clock. But it's really, really clear that Bryan Bresee was the guy that the New Orleans Saints were excited about, and that Bryan Bresee is the guy that they are still very excited about. So let's talk about now how it is that he ends up contributing to the New Orleans Saints immediately, because he is somebody that if he stays healthy and gets out on the field at week one, you should be hearing his name early, and you could be hearing his name often. We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar I'm supposed to say on the market, but I'm going to say in the entire world. As somebody that has traveled the entire world and tried every single protein bar that is out there, you don't have to fact check that. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Just trust me. Dude, trust me. Those are my sources. Built Bar is absolutely the best. And a big part of it is their incredible flavors, as well as, of course, being able to have those incredible flavors, but the macros are nuts. You're talking about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, but like 17 grams of protein. They've got puff bars, which are like these marshmallow, protein-infused marshmallow bars that get you ripped. I mean, it's just absolutely nuts. And if you like these for pre-workout, post-workout, afternoon snacks so you don't have a crash at some point. Just really, really, really good stuff. So make sure you go and check them out. You can find all their products over at built.com. You can head over to Walmart, the pharmacy section. You can get a 4-bar box of some of their most popular flavors, or you can head over to Sam's Club if you got one near you, 13-bar box of some of their best flavors like brownie batter and churros. Make sure you go and check those out. And of course, you can find the rest as well over at built.com. Best tasting protein bar in the world. Dude, just trust me. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. We are wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints, coming at you live here from the New Orleans Saints facility in the media room right now, in the media workroom at the moment. And I saw a big sort of all caps message here from Slim South 504 who says, "Stop the run," and has a bunch of exclamation points. And I do think that that is kind of the next piece when it comes to Bryan Bresee, is how is it that he's able to contribute to you immediately? Well, a big part of it, of course, is the prowess that he brings in the pass rushing game and his ability to be able to be a penetrator, his ability to be able to be a disruptor in the middle of the field. I mentioned that I was going to tell you why this pick is important, especially with the addition of a guy like Bryce Young now in the division, pick 1.1 to the Carolina Panthers. I think that a big part of what you have seen in the New Orleans Saints offense, when you think back to Drew Brees, who was by all accounts of NFL standards, a quote short quarterback. You look at a guy like Bryce Young, who is just a shade over 5'10", a lot more, mobile, dual threat, all those other things. I completely get it. But when you want to throw that guy off of their spot, what do? Well, you do what other teams used to do to the New Orleans Saints, and you generate interior pressure. You could do that by manufacturing that pressure with stunts and twists and things like that, as well as simulating pressure from the second level, or you finally get back to what the New Orleans Saints had been before last year and in previous years. Remember when Ryan Nielsen took over in 2017, we've watched the Saints in a 16-game span every season since then be over 40 sacks per year. Now, that's not 70 sacks plus sacks like the Philadelphia Eagles were last year. But when you think about, trust me, Z, I'm going to get to that too. But when you think about where it is that he could be able to contribute most, it's getting that immediate pressure up the middle. And so when you have a smaller quarterback like a Bryce Young now in the division that you're going to play twice a season, that is, the lead quarterback for one of your rival division teams, not rivals, but, a team within your division, him being able to get that immediate pressure up the middle can disrupt a guy like Bryce Young, especially while he's still young, no pun intended, in a way that we watched happen with Drew Brees as well. So the Saints, who spent so long creating protections and plans and getting the ball out quickly and generating an attack to be able to avoid that, now get to create an attack on the opposite side that starts to kind of lean in on that. So they learn how to stop it and they learn how to counteract it. Now they want to find a way to actually be able to create it over on their side of the ball. And then, as Z brought out here, they also get now the great pleasure of playing against Bijan Robinson, the blue chip, one of the best players in this year's draft, the running back out of Texas, who's now an Atlanta Falcon. And him and Tyler Algier and Cordell Patterson, who has given the Saints fits over on the defensive side over the course of the past couple of years, now get to put together sort of this rushing attack that the Saints are going to have to hold off. Now, I think you're going to need to be able to pass in order to put points on the board. But I do think that the run game is something that, like, the Saints were 24th in the NFL last year in terms of rushing yards allowed. Dennis Allen was asked about it tonight, and he said it wasn't up to their standard and that they weren't pleased with the way that sort of went, but they feel like Bryan Bresee is somebody that can help them there. So I think that that's the other thing that gives you sort of the ability that those active, really heavy, really violent hands that he has that he can utilize in the run game. The thing that I really love about watching Bryan Bresee in tape is that on run plays, when he's locked up with a blocker, instead of him being his eyes coming down to that blocker, his eyes are up over that blocker, looking over to see how the play is developing so that he can pick out the play flow and then move with the play. So that if things are starting to come over to, let's say, his left side, which might be the weak side of the offense, he is sort of starting to lean over and start to work the pressure away to that side over that shoulder of the interior offensive lineman. So he can be a handful big time for some of these offensive linemen, and I think he can be that in the NFL as well, especially against interior offensive line, which still is not the strongest position across football teams or across the NFL. And so I think that he can have an impact in the run game. I believe that he will almost immediately have an impact in terms of the pass rush game, and I think that becomes the most important part. The symbiotic nature and the symbiotic relationship between coverage and pass rush should not be just about corners and edge rushers. It's got to be about safeties. It's got to be about the coverage from the linebackers from the second level. And of course, it's got to be by those interior defensive linemen generating pressure as well. So we have to see if the New Orleans Saints can get back to where they were years ago, to where they were able to create pressure without having to blitz, without having to send additional pass rushers. And I think Bryan Bresee helps you do that in two ways. A, he can get that pass rush and he can get that pressure right up the middle, but also his ability to be able to take on and occupy double teams creates one-on-one opportunities over on the outside for guys like Cam Jordan and Carl Granderson, and maybe even, if the New Orleans Saints are so inclined, a young edge rusher that they could potentially add, whether it be in the NFL draft or after the NFL draft in free agency. And I don't just mean undrafted free agency, I mean overall free agency. Guys like Yannick Ngakoue, who are still out there, who, Yannick has had at least 8 sacks every single season of his career. You add that type of consistency across from Cam Jordan, who has had at least 7.5 sacks since 2012, and you're cooking. Like, I think any team would take that regardless of when those sacks happen or anything like that. And I agree. Black Tool mentions here in the chat, need a D-end. I do think that that's a spot where they could still manage to add talent. And I think guys like Isaiah Foskey out of Notre Dame, we're now in the range that Keon White of Georgia Tech makes sense. I think he would have been a little bit of a reach as a project in round 1, but if you draft him in round 2 or round 3, makes a ton of sense to me. And others that could still be available when the Saints are on the clock, because they don't have to wait very long before they select again at 40th overall in tomorrow's day 2. So I do think that continuing to add to that defensive line should still be in the plans for the New Orleans Saints, whether it's before the NFL draft is over or after the NFL draft is over, once you're on the opposite side of that compensatory pick period. So that's my breakdown for you, y'all. I think, when you look at Bryan Bresee, I think it's pretty clear to see where it is that he fits for New Orleans. It's clear to see why the New Orleans Saints liked him, and it's clear to see he's going to be able to have an immediate impact for you. I know that there are a lot of you out there that are, big fans of relative athletic scores. So let me just give you that on our way out here. 9.61. This is a guy who clocked in at 6'5", 298 pounds. I think I said something like 270, 280 earlier. Actually clocked in at 298, weighed in at 298, 4.86 speed and 22 on the bench rep, and really excellent agility numbers as well in terms of shuttle and 3-cone. So I do think that he is somebody that checks the boxes of athleticism, checks the boxes of size, checks the boxes of character, checks the boxes of need, and also checks the boxes of being able to help the New Orleans Saints improve at a spot where they have very clearly identified that they want to improve. So that's why he fits. That's, how he contributes, and that's why I think he was the pick for the New Orleans Saints at 29. Okay. Coming up tomorrow, we'll break down all of the day 2 selections as well. Defensive end, interior offensive line, running back or positions to watch, tight end, wide receiver. There's a lot of spaces where the New Orleans Saints now can go and really just kind of build on strengths or attack some of those want to haves, the would like to haves, I think is what Mickey Loomis called them on Wednesday. Oh, I do like me some Viliami Fehoko. Shout out to you, Mike. All right, that's going to wrap us up for today. Appreciate you as always for making Locked On Saints a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi, especially if you're going to be out at the crab boil here at the facility on Saturday. Make sure you come and say hi, or let me know that you're here and I'll come out and say hi. And as always, if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you.